Oregon's defense is going to be very good this year. They could put up the best numbers this century for the Ducks. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Lots to get to on today's show. We'll talk Jay Harris later in today's pod and much more. And Oregon's got a 2025 commitment, so plenty of running backs talk. So why don't we start with some defense here? And Oregon's defense last year was really good. I think because of the two glaring losses and the scores of those games, the defense kind of goes under the radar, even though I think most Oregon fans realize, it was a good unit. No, it was actually a semi-historically great unit. So data was only available on the Oregon Sports website going back to 2006, and I tried a couple other of outlets as well. It only went back to around 2004. But in this century, for the data that we do have for Oregon team stats, they've allowed fewer than 20 points per game just twice. Last year and 2019. Those are the only 2 years. It was just over 17 points per game allowed last year. It was just under 16 in 2019. So statistically, you'd say the 2019 defense was better. But I think this Oregon defense going into 2024 could put up numbers even lower than that. So you look at what Michigan's defense did a season ago. And no, I don't necessarily think that Oregon's defense is going to be as great as Michigan's was last year. But they allowed, I believe, single-digit points per game. They just didn't let anybody score. Was it a great defense? Yeah, we saw how it played against Washington, held them to 13 points when they were fully healthy, and the environment was good for throwing the football and whatnot because it was in a dome. And Michigan's defense was just better. Still, though, Oregon has played against a lot of prolific offenses over the years. And out west, I think you see a lot of really great, especially last year, quarterback play and offensive football and some good defenses as well. But in the middle of the country, maybe it's because the weather is colder for a good chunk of the season, or it's just part of their culture. They don't play offense as well in the Big Ten. And so if you have an Oregon defense last year that in the deepest quarterback conference in America was allowing fewer than 20 points per game, I absolutely expect that to be the baseline standard for the Ducks on that side of the ball going into 2024. Then you factor in the transfer portal moves, and I think this Oregon defensive unit from a personnel standpoint is better than it was last year. So I look at 17.3 points per game and say, boy, I feel like that could be really good. Also, there have been 3 times this century that we know of in the documented sense in which Oregon allowed fewer than 20 points per game. 2019, Rose Bowl championship year. Last year's team, 12-2. And then 2010, national championship game appearance against Auburn, of course, just under 19 points per game allowed. And that's a heck of a coaching job by Nick Aliotti because there was not as much NFL level talent on that 2010 defense as there was on the 2019 defense or this past season for the Ducks. But going back to the point about the caliber of offenses Oregon's going up against next year and why this defense can put up historically great stats, last year in the Pac-12, there were 7 offenses that averaged 30 or more points per game. There were a couple, including Oregon's, that averaged over 40 per game. Washington and I believe USC was over 40 points per game as well. In the Big Ten last year, there were 4 teams that averaged 30 or more points per game. Can you guess which ones they are? Let's play everyone's favorite game. Who in the Big Ten can actually score points. Wait for it. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and I'm going to give you 5 seconds to try and guess the fourth one. Honor system on whether or not you actually get this right. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many of you were guessing Maryland and Mike Locksley? Probably not. That's their head coach. Talia Tagovailoa, he's not there anymore. He's off to the NFL. Did not expect Maryland to be one of those teams. But hey, props to the Terrapins there. Anyway, does that team scare you the way that the lineup of Pac-12 offenses did last year? No. Here's another kicker in the statistical department. Last year in the Pac-12, 5 teams threw the ball for 300 or more yards per game. How many do you think there were in the Big Ten? 0. That was a goose egg. So you combine a great defensive mind like Dan Lanning, continuity on that side of the ball when you're talking about the coaching staff, having Tosh Lupoy and Chris Hampton back in there. And certainly there have been a couple of changes with Demetrius Martin leaving and the in-house promotions that took place there. But your most important defensive coaches all there back from a season ago. You bring back an all-conference linebacker in Jeffrey Bassa, an all-conference caliber guy who was honorable mention last year in Jordan Burch. You bring in 2 all-conference caliber defensive linemen in Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell. You got a bunch of guys in the secondary too. This should be an elite unit, maybe the best that we have seen at Oregon, or at least that I have seen in my lifetime. But Oregon has only held opponents under 20 points per game 3 times in the last 20 years. It's not an easy feat, but that's where the expectations for this team, for this unit, should be right now. That should be a baseline standard for success, because you don't have a lineup of offenses. Ohio State and Michigan don't even know who their quarterbacks are going to be. They might have an idea, Ohio State more so than Michigan, but when that's the case and you're not playing against Penn State, who frankly have struggled to consistently play offense at a high level against big-time teams under James Franklin, who I think is a good coach. But I just look at the conference and the lineup of quarterbacks and the offenses that are there and the numbers they put up, and I expect this Oregon defense to be at least 16 to 17 points per game allowed, if not fewer. And can the offense match the production they had last year? Maybe not going into the Big Ten. Maybe there is a 17 to 14 slugfest in Madison against Wisconsin next season. Maybe it's tougher to go to West Lafayette, Indiana, and play Purdue than it is to go to the Bay Area and play Cal and score points. Maybe it is. We'll find out. But defensively, expectations should be really, really high. And I think the numbers back that up. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Oregon's got their latest commitment in the class of 2025. Who does Dierre Hill Jr. remind me of? That's coming up next. You know what this small segment reminds me of? LinkedIn Jobs, because that's what we're talking about. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free, which is my dad's favorite price. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Second segment sips, nothing like it. Nothing like a good commitment to talk about as well. Class 2025 is blossoming for the Ducks with Dierre Hill Jr., 4-star athlete, mostly a running back from Belleville, Illinois. Just goes to show you Oregon can and will recruit anywhere there is talent. I couldn't point out Belleville, Illinois on a map. I could point out Illinois on a map. That's our Big Ten brethren. You know, we got to know where all those states are. But in the class of 2025, Hill is the number 111 overall player, so a top 115 guy. He is the 9th ranked running back according to 24/7 Sports. Now, he is not the biggest dude at the moment, and I'll certainly have Brian Smith on later this week to talk about what he sees from Dierre Hill Jr., but 5'11", 180 pounds, not a super bulky guy. He is, however, a home run hitter. So this past year, his numbers look a little something like this. I'll save the most awesome one for last. 131 carries for just under 1,800 yards and 25 touchdowns. Okay, that's about a touchdown every 5 touches, just so we're clear. That's on the ground. 9 receptions for 163 yards and a score. He's got a passing touchdown, 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns. He also plays on the defensive side of the ball. 32 tackles, 3 picks, and 2 of them, that's my favorite one, returned for 6. So when this guy's touching the football, he's scoring about 1 in every 5 times that he gets the ball in his hands, which is crazy. That is a crazy ratio. So he was playing safety. Now, before I get back to him, I'll just say as a note for those Oregon fans who will definitely enjoy hearing this little tidbit. Hill was coveted by a variety of schools, as you might imagine, for a guy of this caliber. He's got a composite score in the 94-95 range on 24/7 Sports. Michigan was after him. Notre Dame was after him. And, wait for it, Ohio State. And who was his primary recruiter there? Carlos Lachlan. I liked Carlos Lachlan quite a bit. Oregon was able to beat him out right here. And that's not a small thing. So the touchdown ratio on this guy is crazy. Not sure the caliber of competition he's going up against. That's the first thing I thought of when I saw the numbers. Like, man, is he just faster than most Division I players of the running back position are just faster than the guys they're going up against. I mean, Thomas Tyner's stats at Aloha High School in Oregon were bonkers. You know why? He was just faster and better than everybody else. Dierre Hill this past year averaged 13.6 yards a carry. That's an insane stat. That is an insane stat. Is that going to carry over to college? No, of course not. But it tells you the sort of speed that he has and the next level gear that he can hit when he gets his legs moving. And as I mentioned, not a big guy, has played some safety, involved in the return game. My comp here, I hope some of you have put the, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the expression that I'm looking for? I hope some of you have connected the dots. There we go. Charles Nelson is my comp here, who was a fantastic player for the Ducks for several seasons. And, you know, I just look at him and he's not that big, but when he gets in open space, you're not catching him. And that was Charles Nelson. And I think that a guy that can also play on the defensive side of the ball, if you want him to, is just, it's got everything there. The kickoff returns for the touchdowns. Now, full disclosure, when I watched this highlight film, was not super impressed with the kick returns he had on there. Didn't look like he was really demonstrating fantastic vision as much as he was just a better athlete than everybody else. Like he kind of stopped, let guys run to him, and then ran outside. That's not going to work at the college game. But certainly if you can get him the ball in open space, he's someone that can make a big time play. And you can use him all over the place. And I'm sure he'd be able to come in, at least as a true freshman, compete in the return game. But Dierre Hill Jr., that's Oregon's latest commitment in the class of 2025, and the first running back commit since Rashad Samples took over for Carlos Lachlan, and he ends up landing a guy that Lachlan was also after. So, nice piece of news there for the Ducks on the trail. Let's get to the mailbag. YouTube comments or X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB or at LockedOnDucks. Those are the handles. DMs and mentions wide open. If you want priority access and all sorts of other perks, go join the flock over at subtext link in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. Duck question. If Connerly goes pro, name the starting offensive line next year. They will have to rely heavily on the portal at a position where there are the least blue chip targets. Tackle depth, not good. I think this is an interesting point, and I put this in this section of the rundown for today's show because I think that's where Oregon's recruiting efforts, especially with Sandman Thompson decommitting in the class of 2025, I think that's where you're going to see Oregon's recruiting efforts certainly ratchet up. So, as for your direct question here, David, the offensive line next year, if Connerly goes pro, Iapani Lalaulu, or who we know as Poncho, he's starting at center. I feel very confident saying that. After that, yeah, you're right. You're right. The depth is not particularly strong. And, George Silva is a guy that maybe could see some more run this year if Connerly or Cornelius had to come out of the game or go down with an injury. He was a top JUCO target, pretty new to football. He's out of eligibility after this season. Then you're looking at guys like Jaquan McCroy at a tackle spot. Maybe Kawika Rogers is ready to play tackle. But the interior offensive line depth after this year, it starts to thin out. And I think you'll go back to, the 2023 or 22 recruiting classes and see which, or 23 and 24 rather, recruiting classes. I can't believe we're in 2024. Okay, anyway, the 23 and 24 classes and say, okay, which offensive linemen are, ready to kind of step in and play as a redshirt freshman or as a redshirt sophomore. Now, Davey Uli is a name to know. He's a junior this year, which means next year would be a senior season. He's already got game reps and has done a nice job so far. He'd certainly be one of your candidates to be a starting interior offensive lineman. But Nishad Strother, the one-time East Carolina transfer who came in last cycle, he's out of eligibility. Silva's out of eligibility. Connerly, Cornelius, Bedford, and Harper could all leave. It will be a legitimate question. And I think it'll be a test of how many offensive linemen you can bring in via the transfer portal. But also, it'll be a real test for Adrian, or I almost said Adrian Clem. I was that close to saying it'll be a real test for Alik Terry as Oregon's offensive line coach. He's going into his second year. I think the returns have been really, really good. Terry's a young guy who, was brought on when Clem went off to the NFL, and I don't think he skipped a beat, both in the talent acquisition and the development and production, which is, how I kind of evaluate position coaches on Dan Lanning's staff. And I think Terry's been really, really good. And I think that'll be his biggest test. This past year, he had a lot of things going for him. You had veteran returners. Now, he was teaching Jackson Powers Johnson how to play a position he hadn't played before, more than a handful of snaps. That was really impressive. But everything else, Connerly was sliding in. He was new. Cornelius wasn't his first time playing football. You had Harper and Stephen Jones, who were veterans. That was a great job by Alik Terry. There's no doubt about it. It does not match the level of challenge he's going to have going into 2025, because I think you're looking at least two transfers to come in along the offensive line, at the very least for depth, because that's a lot of players. That's a lot of scholarship players to lose at that position. And I don't think that, Charlie Pickard, who's a walk-on, is going to one day find a starting role. I think he just kind of, is a backup emergency depth piece player for you, but I don't think he's expected to do anything for the Ducks along the offensive line. So, yeah, I think the O-line is a real question looking ahead to next year, because you just have a lot of talent, a lot of experience on this year's unit. And look, I'll say this as well. I don't think it's a lock that Connerly goes pro. I think it depends on how this season goes. If he lives up to his potential, he'll be a first or second team Big Ten guy. He'll go to the NFL. If he has a year similar to last year, which was good, by the way, but certainly far from perfect, he could come back for a fourth. He could. I'm just saying. But I'd watch for Davey Uli or Jaquan McCroy, other names like Bryce Bolton in the mix. Lipe Moala as well, a guy from modern day high school that could work his way into the fold. So yeah, I think you will have at least 3 starting offensive line spots up for grabs next year. Could be as high as 4. Jay Harris stood out in the spring game in a big way. Is he bound to play this year? Maybe. Are you bound to check out FanDuel? Absolutely, especially now that I've told you about him, right? It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can also bet Oregon-related bets, national title odds, Big Ten championship odds, individual games, including Ohio State. Ducks are a -1.5 point favorite right now. I would take Oregon in that particular spot. The win total for the Ducks is 10.5. Do I lean over? Do I lean under? Oh boy, I don't know. That is a challenging one. But if you think you got what it takes, go check out FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count and bet anything you want for college football as well. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. So Jay Harris was one of the big offensive standouts from the spring game. He looked just fantastic running the football. He caught a pass out of the backfield, I think, as well. And that led to this question via the subtext community. Given Noah Whittington is coming off an injury and the first part of the season is significantly favorable, do you see Jay Harris pushing up the depth chart permanently, assuming Noah rests for those first few games? What would Jay have to show for you to think he could become the permanent number 2 back with Jordan James being number 1? Jay Harris showed promise during the spring game. Appreciate you and go Ducks. So I think Harris is going to have a role in 2024. I just don't know how big it is going to be. And when you have a full assortment of running backs, Dan Lanning has demonstrated, and certainly this will be the first chance for Rashad Samples to kind of put his own spin on how he likes to use different players and different packages and such, and how creative they get. One thing I liked in the spring game was they brought 3-man backfields back into the fold. I thought those worked great. In 2022, they'd put Whittington and Sean Dollars back there and run, a sweep right, sweep left with one of them lead blocking for the other. I thought they had great success with those plays, and would love to see him get back to it. Maybe Harris is a guy you work into the fold there. He's so big that he could serve as a lead blocker, but we've seen Jaden Lamar serve as a lead blocker. He did that in the Fiesta Bowl for Bucky Irving. He had that great play where he runs wide and he pancakes 2 guys on the same play, and Irving ran for, I think, a first down on like a 3rd and 8 situation there. So, and you're dominating a team when you're running for a first down on 3rd and 8. Anyway, in 2022, Jordan James, who was the number 3 back, and Sean Dollars, who was the number 4 back, they combined for 90 carries in 22 combined games played. That's about 4 carries per game for someone other than the top 2 guys. So that's why I say even if Whittington is fully healthy, there's going to be a role. Now, health is not a guarantee when you're coming off that sort of injury. I don't think Whittington is going to be held back because of the caliber opponents in the non-conference slate. Like against Idaho, yeah, Lamar and Harris are going to get a ton of touches because Oregon should be up 56-3 at the half. You know what I mean? Like Idaho was a good FCS team last year, but Oregon should be able to just get anybody and everybody touches. We should see Dante Moore. We should see Austin Novosad. It should feel a little bit like the spring game. Like you should get to see a little bit of everybody and see young guys in real game situations there. But I think in those first couple of games, yeah, Idaho is one where Oregon just kind of walk over them. But Boise State and Oregon State, look, I'm going to predict Oregon to win those games. They should win those games. How many times do we have to get tripped up by Boise State and Oregon State before people take them seriously? And look, Oregon State has been through the ringer this year. Their roster is worse than last year. And Oregon, of course, at Autzen won that game in blowout fashion, 31-7. And it wouldn't even have been that close, I don't think, if Camden Lewis could have hit a field goal to make it a 17-0 game. That really shifted the tide in momentum in that one. And Oregon still allowed just the one touchdown. And Oregon State does not have as talented of a roster. They've got a new head coach, and they're downgrading at quarterback, and DJU was just all right. But still, I don't think Oregon hasn't won in Corvallis since 2018. I hope and pray and think that changes this fall, but I don't think all three games are an opportunity to just kind of throw guys into the game, see what happens. I think that's the Idaho game. The other two, especially Boise. Boise brought in Malachi Nelson, the USC former 5-star recruit, to play quarterback this year. They've got Ashton Genty back at running back. Spencer Danielson's their head coach after winning the Mountain West last year, taking over for our old friend Andy Avalos. So I don't think either of those games are ones that can be taken super lightly there. But I think your top two guys on the depth chart are solidly Jordan James, Noah Whittington. And there will be an opportunity for a third guy to emerge. I would lean towards Harris, frankly, over Jaden Lamar to be the third back, depending on the situation. Because I look at Jaden Lamar and I see a lot of Sean Dollars, right? Coming in a pass catching situation or, run routes out of the backfield, take the ball on sweeps. Is he an every down back? We don't really know. I think Jaden Lamar is like a little bit thicker version of Travis Dye. Jay Harris could be a short yardage specialist. They just don't make running backs that are 6'2 and 215 or 6'1", whatever. He's big. He's a big dude. And we saw that on display in the spring game. He's running guys over left and right. He's hard to move backwards, and that could be an opportunity for him to develop into a Jordan James 2022 or 2019 Cyrus Abibi Likio, short yardage, change of pace sort of back in there. But what would Jay have to show to surpass Noah Whittington on the depth chart? Man, you'd have to average 8 to 10 yards a carry, because we know what Noah Whittington can do. I think everyone has kind of forgotten about him and how good he is. And look, I love Jordan James. I think that's probably RB1 going into this fall. I don't think Whittington is that far behind him. I think it's closer to a split backfield than a true number one, number two back, because Whittington's really, really good. Assuming he comes off that injury fully healthy, his lateral movement, acceleration, and just bowling ball way to run through a defense is excellent. He is really, really good. And I don't know that there's anything Jay Harris could show me, unless he's just literally impossible to tackle in games every time he gets the ball. It's hard to match Whittington's vision, lateral movement, and acceleration. I think Harris could maybe get to that level. Can you surpass it? I don't think so. I don't think so. But if they want to have a short yardage guy, yeah, I could see Harris on the field. And look, I like that Lamar and Harris are the guys waiting in the wings, because if Whittington, re-aggravates that leg, or if Jordan James gets hurt, this is a violent position. Running backs get hurt all the time. I would feel pretty great about Oregon's running back situation, which is not something you can always say after an injury. But that's where we were at last year, where Bucky was the number one, Whittington was the number two, James was the number three. And Whittington went down, and look, I felt bad for him, of course, because you never want to see a guy go down with that sort of injury. I didn't flinch at it, though, from a season projection standpoint. I never felt like there was going to be a huge drop-off. And if Whittington or James were to get hurt, I feel like they'd be okay. And whether it's Jaden Lamar or Jay Harris, I think the running back room would still be really solid. And I think that the other thing too with this injury to Noah Whittington, you look at those first few games as an opportunity to get him back into game shape, not an opportunity to rest him for Big Ten play for the UCLA and Michigan State games that will follow those three non-conference affairs. I think that's the way the coaching staff will look at it, and I think that's the way that they should look at it, frankly. So good question though on Jay Harris. Last one here from Pierre. I had to include Pierre's question today because I talked about Dierre Hill, and their first names are only separated by one letter. So if you ever wonder how the mailbag selection goes. Hey, Spencer, I have a question I'd love to hear you answer on the show. I'm sorry if it has been asked already. I'm normally an everydayer, legend, but I've been slacking because of finals week. You're forgiven. If you could, which all-time Ducks would you bring back to the roster heading into next season? Let's add 2 guys to each side of the ball. We Duck fans are blessed to have you as our host. Thank you for all your work. I appreciate the kind words. I really do. I'm glad you enjoy it. So I did not have to think long and hard about these particular answers. So 2 guys on each side of the ball. Offensively, Bo Nix or Marcus Mariota, coin flip. Like, that's always the solution because those guys set the bar so ridiculously high. And then, frankly, because the rest of this team is just so deep and talented, where would I say the next biggest need is? I'm going Jackson Powers Johnson here and have Poncho go back to being the 6th offensive lineman instead of the starting center. So I didn't have to go too far back offensively. Now, defensively, went back a little bit further. I think there's still a question about whether or not you have a really rangy ball hawking safety in this Oregon secondary, and I'm going to go with Verone McKinley here, who led the country in interceptions back in 2021 as one guy, and then I always, I haven't seen Brandon Johnson at nickel yet, and we don't really know what we have there, but I love Oregon's defensive line. Love their top 2 at linebackers. Devin Jackson is the 3rd. Like the corners a lot. I think of the nickel spot, there's no better nickel than Javon Holland. Never has been, never will be, as long as Oregon has run a 4-2-5 defensive scheme. So those would be my picks, but I'm always here for the fun question. Thanks for sending it in. Keep the questions rolling in. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.